Good morning, everybody. I think I made the huge mistake earlier on when I was talking with Dario, because Dario is going to join me in a minute, and I said, no, I'll do everything within 20 minutes, and then we can have a kind of 10-minute chat afterwards and sort of go through some of the points that are made and so on. However, those who know me, and a number of you I know have seen me talk before, the likelihood of my actually sticking to time, I don't really have a very good track record for that, so I will do my best, however, so I should just kind of get on with it. First of all, sort of a little bit of an introduction. I think, obviously today we're really trying to focus on the enterprise side, the enterprise aspects of the mobile ecosystem, and that's really what I've tried to do in here. However, as a vendor, as a supplier to this industry, I've got to be honest, that certainly isn't where we started, and it certainly isn't probably what we are known for. But let me try to kind of explain kind of a little bit of that transition. But I will start off with where we fit today, and I now have to find out whether I can. Yes, I can click a button. This is a slide which has been used in a number of the MEF documents. I mean, it's almost been a reference architecture that has been used to explain this ecosystem that we belong within. And although, I look at that and I go, oh gosh, well, everything's connected to everything else. Well, that's the feature of an ecosystem, and that's exactly what you'd expect. But trying to simplify that out and really work out kind of which particular aspect of that ecosystem we're talking about. I've done a horribly simplistic, childish PowerPoint slide which attempts to sort of break it out almost into a supply chain. So I've really sort of just flattened out the particular aspect that I'm interested in, looking at, and again, this has got to frighten a lot of people who sort of have no awareness of this ecosystem we live in for messaging, and sort of this digital marketing world. But the brand going to an application provider, going to a platform provider, traffic, messaging of various sorts going through multiple aggregators. I don't know if you noticed on that last slide, but it was showing at least 3 layers of aggregation likely to happen within a network, which is providing that kind of routing and hubbing function in the middle of a network. And I'm separating out the hubs from the aggregators, and although that line between those two things is a very fuzzy line, it's difficult to really work out where one ends and the other one begins. However, that is the function that is then delivering the traffic into the mobile operators, who are delivering to the phone, to the end user, to the subscriber. So that's the diagram that I look at, and to give you, or any of you who are sort of not familiar with what we do in this space, an idea of where we play, well, we act as a global number information provider. And it really is just numbers. We provide information. In its essence, it's the simplest possible thing you can imagine. Can you just tell me where this number lives in the network? That's almost, there's a bit more to it than that, but that's almost all we do. So we're sitting in the middle, and generally the traditional, and I'm going to extend this in a moment, but the traditional users of that data are those A2P platforms. They're looking at the number, they're trying to work out where does it live, which operator does it belong to. They're doing that by looking at the ranges that the numbers live in, and they're also looking at probably a much more important thing, number portability. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But the aggregators are doing the same thing. They've also got to identify exactly where that traffic belongs, who should I send it to, who have I got the deals with, who have I got a route through. And then the hubs are doing the same, and they're doing that at a wholesale level, probably rather than a retail level. And then the operators, even the operators, still have that problem. And although you would have thought they're all in a great position, they know where all the numbers are because they manage those numbers themselves, we still provide a lot of information to them as well, because they need to know if it's not theirs, well, whose is it? Does it belong somewhere else in the network? So I mentioned number portability. This is really what drives our business more than anything else. It's the fact that, well, the UK, about 30% of the numbers are not where they should be. They've been ported somewhere else. We've got markets that go all the way up to 50%, 60% even, where numbers have been shuffled around. So using, I make that point on the left, range allocation. Who does a range belong to? Who does a number belong to? Well, you're going to get it wrong at least 30% of the time if you just use range allocation. So this has become a critical point, and why is it so important to you? One part is delivery assurance. Will it actually get there? Now, a lot of markets, you can give it to the wrong operator and that operator will forward it on. But they'll probably charge you more for that. They might not, but they might. Depends on the country and the environment. So it can be a straight cost issue, but it can also be this issue of delivery assurance. If you give it to the wrong operator in the US or in many of the European countries, it just won't be delivered. It's as simple as that. You might get told it's not being delivered, but you might not. It might just have got dropped on the floor. So there's a good number of environments where that traffic, you simply don't know whether it's actually got there. The last point is performance, just optimizing the route, where you're making sure that traffic has reached that point in the shortest, most effective possible way and hasn't had to retry. So we still see the situation where a lot of traffic is going through a retry process. You've tried to deliver it, it failed because the number's been ported, you then try another operator. You might even try another one after that. So what should have been a quarter of a second has ended up as 2 or 3 seconds before that message actually gets delivered, or even minutes in some cases. So trying to summarize very, very quickly where we fit in that traditional core of the network, you can see 9/10 of this has been about routing, or if you're American, routing. So that's kind of been where we have come from. But what I really want to talk about is how we've then seen the extension of, well, what can you tell me about a number? You can tell me what network it's on. You can tell me whether it exists. You can maybe tell me a little bit more about that number. How can that information then be extended further down and begin to apply to the brands themselves? How might they use that? So what I've done is picked up 3 particular customer applications who are distinctly enterprise applications. So I'm going to shift right the way out the end of this thing and tried to go through those. Now, unfortunately, very few of our customers are particularly keen on us telling you exactly who they are. They don't want their competition to know how they're doing these things. I'd love to be able to put nice big brand names on, but I can't. So my apologies, I have to do these as rather anonymous, but each of these are specific customer examples that we've got today where we have a direct enterprise application of what we're doing. Find a button. So the first one I'd describe as really a contact center application. This is a company that deliver a huge number of outbound voice calls. It's interesting on those last stats that sort of voice is losing a little bit of its grasp, but it is still a massive channel to marketplace, and the enterprises are using it in a big way. And the decision that they're really trying to make is really, should I call? I'm using this because it's quite, when you start putting the numbers on it, it gets really quite interesting. I mean, they're making about 20,000 calls a day. So they're looking at, that's obviously significant termination fees that they have to pay to actually deliver that traffic. Out of that, I mean, naturally, a very large proportion of those calls aren't going to get answered. But what they want to do is maximize the number that do get answered. So out of that lot, they end up making a kind of estimate that it's costing them about 20 things, pounds, dollars, euros, whatever currency you wish to use, but 20-somethings. And that's what it's going to cost them. That's the basis that they're using. So if they can reduce the number of failed calls, the ones that are definitely not going to connect, that is a good thing to do. So now, I mean, we're not doing any kind of AI or analytics or analysis of the data. The sort of data that we're providing, I mean, we often describe it as authoritative. I also sort of make the distinction between subjective versus objective data. Ours is objective. It comes from the network. It's kind of like a fact. It's not an estimate. Oh, I think it's this either works or it doesn't. This is turned on or it isn't turned on. It's switches, binary stuff. So, you know, the first thing that they can start to do, and before they actually make that call, and by the way, those calls have usually already been validated. The number's gone through their CRM system. It's probably checked the format and made sure it's just about right. What sort of astonishes us with these kinds of volumes and these types of customers, though, is just how many times that's not quite right. So, you know, even in that environment, and I think, yes, probably the next slide, whoops. press my button more clearly. They were seeing that out of that, as they went through a step-by-step process of actually validating those calls, you do a check, just make sure that they actually exist, that number is not just plain wrong, it's not too long or too short. And 100 or so a day were wrong, so it's peanuts, but it's still 100 calls that you didn't just make. The next level is to look more closely at the number and check to see the ones that haven't been allocated by the operator. So rather than does the number look okay, it's does the operator actually have a record for this particular number? And you're seeing, now you're looking at a few hundred a day. Then you start to look at the ones which are simply, then you start to look at the next level of those, and we're ending up with about 16% that cannot actually be found on the network. And now, so you're now into a related error, some sort of subscriber-related error where there is no way of actually reaching that specific subscriber. And then you take it to another level, which is kind of the last step, which is, in some cases, the information is made available by the operator to tell you that that subscriber is not actually on the network at the moment. In other words, it's valid, it's allocated, it's an active subscription, but the subscriber's not available right now. So you end up with another, where are we? About 5% of those that are actually showing up as unavailable at that moment in time. Now, all of this is ending up with, 77, so what, that's 23% that got knocked out. 23% of 20,000 calls, 20,000 calls, and they're costing about £20 a time. I've got some big numbers. So this is a very, very simple, should I call that number? Is it valid? Good format? Is it allocated? Is it registered on the network? Is it available? Am I going to make a successful call? I've just eliminated a huge cost out of my outbound calling process by some very simple authoritative checks. You're probably going to do a whole load of other checks as well. But here are some nice simple ones that can be based on network-derived information as a first pass to eliminate the obviously unreachable types of traffic. Second case is very different. I'm going to use one which works the other way around and is about inbound calls. So this is where I'm seeing someone calling my call center. That call is coming in from you don't know where, could be anywhere on the planet. And again, the similar type of information can be used. In this case, it's much more about validation. It's probably a rather simpler approach to it. And it is interesting thinking about the caller ID. I mean, obviously, I think most of us will refer to it as the caller ID, the number that is calling you. The telecoms operators will call it the A number. You might hear it the origin number, whatever it gets called. Really, I think up until about 2 years ago, I would say most people ignored the validity or the context. You knew it was there, and it was a good caller ID, and it probably would trigger on your mobile phone. But when you're in a call center, you might use it for identifying if it's a known customer or something like that. But you weren't looking at it for much else. You were assuming it was right as well. I think what's happened in the last couple of years is so much fraud, so much of the spamming, so much of the attempted, fraudulent attempts have been hiding behind a false ID. So this idea of falsifying that ID has become very common, ridiculously common as a technique for really protecting yourself when you're trying to make a fraudulent call. So the regulators are now looking at that in a big way. We're engaged with a whole series of national, global operators, and the regulatory organizations that control them. They are now all looking at what are the measures we can take to check that caller ID and make sure it really makes sense. Within the MEF, we have a group that are totally focused on looking at caller ID, validating that identity information of the calling party. Who are they? What are they? Why are they calling me? So I think that is a whole new focus that we've got into. And there are also some very, very basic tools. So I'm going to bring that, I'm going to make that point. Let's keep it simple, because there are some really, really simple things I can do to make sure that caller ID actually makes sense. One I've already talked about in quite a big way, which is it formatted correctly? is it actually an allocated number that belongs to a real live operator? There's lots of numbers that exist in the number plan, but they haven't actually been allocated to an operator. If you can tell that, you're in very good shape to be able to make that kind of call on, am I getting this right? But there's another tool which has really come out in the last couple of years, the concept of a do not originate list. And I think this is it's a fundamental tool which I think is going to make a big difference to all of us here. I think it was almost mentioned before, rather more from a whitelist point of view, this is more a deny list. And I think, those two things tend to go hand in hand, and you're trying to make sure that you're saying, is it good? Is it bad? How do I make that decision? Well, the DNO list is a really interesting one, and I'm seeing, we've got about 6 or 7 countries now that have started to build these DNO lists that say, this is a bad number. It should not be originating a call. Now, some of it is very, very simple. I mean, like my oil tank. My oil tank has a SIM on the top of it. It has a telephone number. It can send a message. I'm even more scared about my dog. My dog's collar has a tracker on it. If you get a call from my dog, and it's... no, I don't know whether I can do this. Anyway, and it's ordering the 2,000 bonios or a freshly plucked pheasant. How I allowed myself to say that, I do not know, but I got it right. Anyway, no, do not accept that call. So it's very easy. I know that is an IoT device. We can tell it from its number, as long as that number is recognized as an IoT device. You should not be taking a call from it. You should not be accepting that order for those 2,000 bonios. So that DNO concept is really developing. Now, the US, I think, has made great strides. They've actually embedded it in regulation now, and the principle that an inbound call into the US with a US number needs to be checked against DNO. Our parent company is responsible for managing that data or one of the versions of that data. It is an interesting subject because even the US regulator, the FCC, have ended up describing it as a reasonable DNO. Now, I've never heard reasonable as a technical term, but anyway, this has come up as a sort of technical requirement. Reasonable means it makes sense. It makes sense that this number should not be calling. And there's lots of reasons. As I said, it could be an IoT device. It could be it doesn't exist. It's not been allocated. It could be that it's a perfectly good, say a toll-free number, a free phone number, that will never make a call to you, should never make an outbound call. It's only going to be used for inbound calling. So this concept of being able to identify numbers which should never originate a call, and you should never get a call from them in your call center, it's quite easy to know what to do with those calls. It should never have called you. There's something wrong behind that. Now, I do think this concept of checking caller ID is a little more, or a little less black and white. It's more difficult to make that decision. But it's very easy in that call center environment to effectively raise a flag to the agent. You're really saying, watch out, this one's got an iffy caller ID on it. It didn't match, or it is clearly a number that shouldn't be making a call. Apply additional security checks. But you can take it one step further and just say block. Now, notice I was talking about the regulators and the operators earlier on. The interesting part for us is, of course, the people who actually get directly hurt by this are the call center providers, the contact center providers. They're the ones who are taking the wasteful call at that £20 a call, or probably more if you get held on it for longer. So not only is there a responsibility at a regulatory level on some of the operators to start applying these DNO rules, but it makes good sense. There is a good case for you to check it as an enterprise and be able to do exactly those same checks, because there will always be calls that have come through that maybe have been originated in some other way that the operator hasn't been able to intercept. So we're really seeing this as sort of that second case of an inbound call, being able to check it, being able to ensure that there's nothing going wrong. I mean, just to give you a feel for some of the stats, this is directly from the customer I was talking about. I've actually eliminated, they're a UK organisation, a huge number of UK calls, so I've taken those out of the stats. But when you look at what's going on across other countries, you see some massive variations. So on the right-hand side, these are all of the failed queries. This is where it went wrong. And all of a sudden, a massive burst came out of Italy back in May last year. You've got the Netherlands all of a sudden sort of comes and goes and waves around. And those variations in failed inbound calls, or the statistics of those high-risk calls, can provide some very interesting clues as to where the bad traffic is. So we've also seen something in here, which is that concept of a trigger. It's not necessarily just thinking about, I've got a bad call. I've had a bad call with a bad caller ID. It's also a trigger that says, if you see a whole load of calls that are coming from the same block, or at the same time, or from the same country, take a look. There is a risk here. Something is going wrong. You need to investigate it. Right, so the third and last is about outbound call validation. This, I think, I have to say, from a financial point of view, is probably the best of the lot. This is the one where the return on investment was truly astonishing. It's been going on, we've been working with this particular customer over, 2.5 years, something like that. And I'm actually going to show stats from the beginning of when we started working with them. Their real issue was about callback requests. It was about click to call. They are a traditional, very end user, very, what am I trying to say, very retail-oriented organization. So that concept of click to call is absolutely critical to them. They want someone to look at an advert for something and press the button, click to call, I need more information, or I want to place an order. They can't just stop doing that. However, there is a huge opportunity for people to say, click to call, I would like you to call, and those of you from the UK, I would like you to call back on 0900. Oh, so it's going to cost you £2 a minute to make that call, is it? So premium rate calls, incredibly easy to just put a premium, all right, you can do some checks, make sure it's not an 0900 number. But what about all of the global locations around the world where you don't know what's premium rate? And it's not just about premium rate as well, it's about revenue share numbers. In other words, numbers which will result in a payback to whoever receives that call. And some of those are regular numbers on regular rates. It's just that someone's getting a couple of cents, pence, whatever it is, a minute for that particular callback. So the fraudsters picked this particular company and said, ha, easy meat. They won't notice if we send a few calls. But of course, the fraudsters then realized they're making an absolute fortune out of this, and what was a few calls turned into literally millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars of totally invalid calls being requested through the callback scheme. And you may say all of the usual advice, fix your callback button, make sure it's not stupid, make sure you can't press it 20 times. How many websites have actually got those checks in there that actually stop you from making 20 callbacks? Now, a lot have learned, but a lot haven't. So it's the ones that haven't that really need to make these. This was a very big, sophisticated company. They're not stupid. They knew what they were doing. And still, the fraudsters were finding their way around because they could get under the radar and actually make those calls. So what these guys had done was check every single number. Obviously, they don't just use the things I've been talking about, just the very, very simple, does it exist? Is it premium rate? Those things, again, a little as I described on the last case, are being used as triggers. They're triggers to say, oh my gosh, I've just seen a whole load of calls. There are some really obvious triggers that you can pull out of this. And when you look at the sort of stats that were coming in, all right, and again, this gives you a feeling of the scale for this. These are the failed calls. These aren't the successful ones. These are 15, 20 million calls a month, which have been identified as invalid. Really simple. Just don't make them. They don't exist. They're not even numbers that will ever connect. So I can eliminate these from my callback requests without any loss of business. Zero impact on my revenue. A big impact on my costs. And you then find ridiculous things. So I've got 1 million calls in a month to Monaco. I mean, just how likely is that? How many? 1 million callback requests from one country. Jordan, again, that was up in the 3-4 million mark over a couple of months. So this company was very, very quickly able to pinpoint. It's not about black and white blocking. A lot of it is about pinpointing where the problems are, where a fraudulent request is coming from. So this also falls into the category we were talking about earlier on of this sort of artificial inflated traffic. This is a classic case of AIT, but right the way from the brand. The brand was being hit by gazillions, technical term, of callback requests which simply didn't make sense. So, you know, what I've tried to show is just a few examples of where what we were describing as sort of authoritative information, network-derived information, traditionally being used in the routing environment, gets used in the validation environment, not just by the platform providers and the aggregators and hubs, but also right the way down to the brand. And hopefully that's given you a few ideas of where, you know, a theme I've said so many times is using really, really simple information can actually make a massive difference, can have a drastic impact on your costs. So hopefully that was useful. And Dario, I don't know, we've probably not got too much time. As I expected, I did run the whole time. My apologies for that.
Well done. You didn't want my intrigue.
However, I usually ask myself the questions.
Well, okay. And I will have some very fast questions then.
Okay.
The first one is, you are the winner of the MEFI for Personal Contribution Award for 2024. How did you do it?
Oh, well, I did it by... What? You seen what we do. So I sit there and I find all these numbers and...
Well, probably it's been Santa Claus, right? So you save money, you hire quality, people like you in the industry, on top of maybe being very knowledgeable and share your knowledge of others. But then let's talk about...
It helps being very old.
We want a beard now.
I need a beard.
So let's talk about your health, and everybody wants to know, how does Santa do it? Where is that coming? The authoritative number, where is it coming from? What are your healths doing?
That's, you know, I've talked about this being incredibly simple. My engineering team, basically, every time they hear me say this, are ready to kill me, because this is the most difficult job you can imagine. You know, we go do it very hierarchically. We collect information from the ITU, we collect it from the regulators, we collect it from the operators. The operators have seen us in a different role, actually. I mean, the early days, we had to go and extract it from them. Now what they do is they come to us and ask us to publish it.
Can you please?
So yes, please would you make our latest information available, because it's very difficult to do this in real time. You know, the networks come up in real time. You launch a new network, you launch a new MVNO, you launch a new service. How do you let the world know that those numbers actually are valid and that they belong to a particular operator? How do you do that in real time? And we're talking about minutes. You know, in many cases, they really are looking at that being available because they've launched a service today and they want it enabled the next day. So we have a lot of those requests that come straight to us, but a huge amount of it is still based on horribly manual research. So that is trawling through regulator sites and extracting information on a day-by-day basis. Now, there are we've got about 60 countries where there are sort of authoritative number portability administrators. Generally what we do is, again, we have relationships with those organizations where they're providing us a daily feed of the information, which then goes into the central databases that are being extracted. But it's very interesting looking at, you know, we talk internally so much about attributes. What are the attributes of a number? Collecting those additional attributes is what adds value. So you start, does it exist? Who does it belong to? What's it used for? Is it actually valid? Is it actually active? We get on to much more real-time things like, is it actually roaming? Things like that, those additional little elements of information which are helping people to make those decisions. So that's where the investment goes, that's where the costs go into collecting the information. Then the process of disseminating the information is where we just have to make it easy to use. So that's the other part of allowing it to be used by all these parts of the ecosystem.
Well, great, and great to hear from you, not just how you do it, but the fact that there is so much change happening. It goes back to the theme for today, that wind is changing, there is change in the re-engineering. And XConnect, I would say, is so tightly associated with the success of the A2P business. You've been there. You've been. I said, oiling the wheel.
I love it when you use that phrase. He used that phrase once before, and I've quoted Derry about 3 or 4 times because I love that description. Just oiling it. We're not the wheel, we're the oil.
Exactly. But you're looking at other cogs, engineer. You're looking at other things. So that is happening everywhere. This kind of creativity is across the industry.